As you know, President Obama is at a meeting with his counterparts from Mexico and Canada, and I assume that probably shortly he and the communist leader of the Canadian Parliament will be coming forward issuing a statement on the workplace violence that happened yesterday in Turkey at the airport in Istanbul. Terrible, terrible situation. Apparently, a lot of people who are just ticked off at their supervisors strapped on explosive vests and grabbed some firearms and went out and killed 41 people and injured well over 200. So, again, one of the worst cases of workplace violence we've seen in recent history, this time taking place at the third busiest airport in Europe. 7 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're not trying to, stereotype the religion of peace this morning on the radio, but I just have some thoughts, and these are really a bit of a follow-up, and you can compare and contrast to some of the events this month in the city of Twin Falls and maybe get an idea of the direction we happen to be heading. And, of course, by bringing this up, I risk being called a racist and a bigot, and, well, who knows. This comes from Breitbart. For a time yesterday, this was the lead story at Drudge. I happened to see it just before leaving work, about 11:30 to 12 o'clock yesterday morning. 7 refugees with active TB sent to Idaho. Now, when they say active TB, tuberculosis, in this day and age, because of antibiotics being overused, we have a lot of drug-resistant TB. That means we have new strains of tuberculosis that can't be cured, and they can be quite deadly. So bringing people here who have it is essentially, when they cough on you, is an opportunity for you to catch it, and then you can develop it, and then you can spread it to someone else. But, of course, we have to do these things as part of the reparations for our colonial past and white privilege, so therefore we just have to accept it. 7 refugees with active tuberculosis were diagnosed shortly after their resettlement in Idaho, according to the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. Now, I don't know that the department came out and called a news conference and explained this. I think someone had to do a wee bit of digging to actually come across this. In other words, we wouldn't want to embarrass the elites by saying, well, okay, there might be a problem with all of this refugee resettlement, but only one. This makes Idaho the 7th state to confirm to Breitbart News that recently arrived refugees have been diagnosed with active TB. Idaho is one of 14 states that have withdrawn from the federal refugee resettlement program, where the federal government, has hired a voluntary agency to resettle refugees under the questionable Wilson Fish Alternative Program. In Idaho, the federal government has contracted the Idaho Office for Refugees, a division of the large nonprofit known as Janus, to run the program. Janus. Janus is one of the largest organizations within the lucrative and politically connected refugee resettlement industry, which is paid more than $1 billion per year by the federal government. So in other words, ka-ching, ka-ching, hey, so what? If we end up exposing a couple of 100,000 people to drug-resistant tuberculosis, we're all going to be rich, and we're going to go live on an isolated beach somewhere, and the rest of you can just fight it out for whatever scraps are left as you're dying. This from the Daily Caller. Now, this is one thing that I had to share this morning because I think it sums up what we're dealing with here, but we're seeing it elsewhere. So Twin Falls is not an aberration when it comes to problems related to refugee resettlement. Before I get to that, though, just this very quickly. This came from Christian Post yesterday. A Muslim father burns 9-year-old son for converting to Christianity in Uganda. A Muslim man in eastern Uganda tied his 9-year-old son to a tree and then set it on fire after his son converted and refused to fast during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, a Christian persecution watchdog group is reporting. Morning Star News reports that 9-year-old Nassif Malagera, who lives in the Kamuli district of the Kisosi sub-county, lots of African names are confusing, I know, was severely burned by his father, 36-year-old Abukar Malagara, who caught him breaking the Ramadan fast after going 2 days without food on June 9th. So the kid was hungry too, I suppose. So therefore, let's tie him to a tree. I loved my daughter, still do. I cannot imagine any whack job of a parent tying a child to a tree and then burning the child. But apparently this is considered to be quite acceptable in the religion of peace. Oh, I must burn you because it is a peaceful statement. And this from the Daily Caller, as I mentioned. In Canada, there is a TV show called The Rebel. I guess it's mainly a YouTube program because in Canada they have strict laws that will not allow certain people who have differing views from what the elites have to actually have a public voice. But the rebel has been investigating refugee resettlement throughout Canada, and they've come up with some rather frightening statistics about things going on in schools around the country. This is Faith Goldie. She is an anchor, and she says they have uncovered some serious problems in what are called the Maritime Provinces, especially one that is just north of the state of Maine.
I never intended on becoming the voice for North American children victimized by our government's sloppy Syrian migrant policies. But regrettably, that is exactly what it's come to. Viewers might remember my trip to Halifax earlier this year. Interviews with Nova Scotia parents, teachers, and elementary school students at Shabukdo Heights revealed a school-sanctioned cover-up. Muslim migrant boys in a Canadian school slapping, choking, and threatening young schoolgirls almost daily. A principal unwilling to discipline the delinquents, and a school board that dismissed the allegations as a byproduct of bigotry. Well, after we ran that report right here on the Rebel.media, we launched an e-tip line, tips@therebel.media, where we encouraged anyone whose child was being bullied without recourse to contact us so we could get to the bottom of it. One of the emails we received included a Facebook post. That post was made by a parent whose child goes to Fredericton High School in New Brunswick, Canada. The parent claims that school is bringing in, quote, an interesting mix of migrant students ranging from 11 to 22 years of age. The parent claimed that some of the adult men in that school had full beards and were trying to hit on 14 to 15-year-old female classmates. But after being brushed off, these adult migrant men took to successfully hitting on the girls in the years below. The parents said that the Canadian boys at Fredericton High School have become frustrated, but are too scared to speak up because, quote, they know how dangerous the "you're a racist" label will be for the rest of their lives.
You know, it's a bit like going to a city council meeting in Twin Falls and having one of the Democrats on that council compare you to the KKK if you have any objections to what's going on in this community. So you got to let these things happen and run their course and sacrifice your children at the altar of political correctness. The writer here says the Rebel, that is the show you were just listening to, that's a clip from it, received more than 2,700 documents from the school in response to a Freedom of Information request. Because of the sheer number of emails, the organization is breaking the story up into several reports this week on their show, The Hunt, with that reporter, Faith Goldie. Now, folks, you do get the idea that perhaps we've completely let the wheels fall off the train in this situation, and it may be impossible from here on out to ever do any repairs. I have this I have to share this morning. I don't like to read a lot of stuff on the air. I don't allow people to call in and read things on the air. As Rush Limbaugh says, leave it to the professionals. But I came across this morning, and it's from a writer by the name of Damon Linker, and he's writing at a publication called The Week. Now, he's writing about Brexit, but Brexit really has a great deal to do with the migration and refugee resettlement currently going on in places like Europe, but also around the world, here in North America. Now, he writes this: I used to be a conservative. I now consider myself a liberal, but I never called myself a progressive. There's a reason why, and it has nothing to do with policy. Progressives believe in all of that too, but they add something else. He says a faith in historical progress that gives the movement its name. This belief has many sources and it takes many forms. The same theologically infused faith informs Barack Obama's frequent invocation of, quote, an arc of history, unquote, that bends towards justice. And the writer goes on to say progressivism holds out a very specific moral vision of the future. It will be a world beyond particular attachments, such as religious faith, patriotism, tribalism, nationhood, beyond ethnic or linguistic or racial or religious or national forms of solidarity. In their place will be only the acceptable form of solidarity, humanitarian universalism. It's a bit like listening to a John Lennon recording of Imagine, you know. Imagine there's no religion, above us only sky. You know the song, and that's really the Bible of the current progressive movement. The writer says this means that the progressive future will even result in the end of politics itself, at least if politics is understood as encompassing more than the jostling of interest groups, bureaucratic administration, and the management of government benefits. The big questions of politics will already be answered, he writes. The big disputes settled once and for all. Everyone will understand that all particular forms of solidarity are morally indefensible. That would be patriotism, a belief in closed borders rather, a belief in your own religious faith. Those will all be viewed as forms of racism. And that the writer says all strong political stands against humanitarian universalism in the political realm are politically unacceptable, just various forms of fascism. So if you won't bake a cake for somebody because you don't approve of their wedding, that is just absolutely wrong in the progressive's mind. And he writes, they believe not only that their views deserve to prevail in the fullness of time, but also that they are bound to prevail. The European Union may well be the purest and most ambitious experiment in progressivism ever attempted, a transnational economic and political entity founded entirely on the moral premises of humanitarian universalism, which is to say, on the negation of attachments. That would be your country, your particular religious faith, your ethnicity, etc. And then he goes on to write, I suspect Angela Merkel is the real catalyst behind the outcome of the UK referendum. Not only did the German Chancellor insist on admitting well over 1 million refugees and migrants from the greater Middle East, supporters of the policy have also made it clear on numerous occasions that they consider racism and xenophobia to be the only possible grounds for opposing her. From the standpoint of progressivism, this makes perfect sense. An open-door policy toward refugees and migrants fleeing unrest in the Holy Land in North Africa is obviously the only morally acceptable option. It shouldn't matter whether those immigrants are Muslims or if they're Syrians or Libyans, skilled or unskilled, poor or middle class, literate or illiterate, eager to assimilate or convinced of the need to resist it. There's certainly no reason to suspect that any of them might turn toward terrorism now or a generation from now. They're just placeless people. Human beings in need of aid, comfort, and charity. That's all that should matter, he writes. And he's talking about what this viewpoint is of this elitist group, except that many millions of citizens in the European Union member countries don't see it that way. In other words, they are resisting, as the French people resisted the French Revolution, and then the revolutionaries who claimed to represent them tried to crush the French people. The writer says, what if progressivism is not inevitable at all? What if people will always be inclined by nature to love their own, themselves, their families, their neighbors, members of their churches, their fellow citizens, their country, more than they love the placeless abstraction of humanity? In that case, the act of ignoring or even denigrating this love will have the effect of provoking its defensive wrath and ultimately making it stronger. Explaining, by the way, why the British just sent a great big middle finger to the European Union. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. More on this coming up in just a moment. Donald Trump and both Nigel Farage, some great statements about the direction we're going in the Western world and why we need to put the brakes on. That's coming up in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Donald Trump had a chance to speak to a crowd in Ohio just shortly after news was breaking about the workplace violence at the airport in Turkey. Oh, mainstream media isn't going to like him. Despite all of the talk that Hillary Clinton has pulled away and that the election is over, according to all of the fellow travelers who back her in the mainstream media, Quinnipiac is out with a new poll today that says it's back to a dead heat. A few more workplace violence outbreaks, and Trump could actually skate with this thing, right? Well, this is the candidate speaking at a rally in Ohio yesterday, and you know liberals aren't going to like what he has to say because it's not nice.
So we can't do waterboarding, which it's not the nicest thing, but it's peanuts compared to many alternatives, right? So we can't do waterboarding, but they can do chopping off heads, drowning people in steel cages. They can do whatever they want to do. And, you know, they eat dinner like us. Can you imagine them sitting around the table or wherever they're eating their dinner, talking about the Americans don't do waterboarding and yet we chop off heads? They probably think we're weak, we're stupid, we don't know what we're doing, we have no leadership. You know, you have to fight fire with fire. We have people out there.
It would appear that the audience liked that reference. You know, I was just thinking as I was listening, if you had an acetylene torch and you took some people's shoes off, I think you could cut down on the recidivism among the jihadists rather quickly. That if we would just allow our people who used to do this sort of thing in the CIA and in certain elements of the military to do this job, instead of being micromanaged by the politically correct. I mean, Barack Obama wants to put the Marine Corps in pink uniforms. And I kid you not. But we'll talk about that a little later in the program. This just shows you how far we've fallen away. And there's just no explanation for it other than the fact that people are trying to destroy this country from within. And all of those people who support these efforts, they're the ones who believe in open borders, bringing in immigrants from Central and South America here by the millions, bringing in refugees and migrants by the millions. They are the fifth columnists who are looking to destroy America. They are, by that definition of what I was talking about a few minutes ago before the break, the progressives who sit around listening to John Lennon's Imagine, and they actually believe that that's true, and that they're going to act out the song and somehow better the world. Keeping in mind he was taking all sorts of dope most of his life. He's a great fellow to follow, isn't he? 736-0300, 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. You're on the air.
Yes, Bill, I've been trying to, get a hold of, I went to call Dr. Fox's office at CSI and talked to his secretary because he was gone. I asked her, I says, how do I get a hold of the trustees? I'd like to have their names and numbers. She says, well, I can't give you their phone numbers and names, but I can give you an email. I thought I would get an email for each one. All I got was just a general email for them, at CSI. But I was able to find their names. I don't have their phone numbers, but I probably could figure it out. Turns out that I know a few of them already. And I don't know if it's something that you want me to bring up on the air right now, or you rather I didn't, their names.
We can get into it at a later point. I don't want to foul things up. I'm not trying to cause trouble. The intent here, forgive me, I know I interrupted you, and I'll be done, is to somehow we've got to get these people to believe that this refugee program is not something that more than just a radical few are afraid of. Everybody's afraid, but they won't speak up. I wished people would call in or something or whatever, and please let us know how you feel, because there's a lot more of us than the CSI trustees believe there are. Well, and I'll add to that, and thank you for the call. I know a great many people in local politics who are with us, but they do not feel that they have the political support to come out publicly and say, I'm with them, because they know they're going to be attacked by the mainstream media, the newspaper editors. They know they're going to be attacked by a lot of other fellow travelers in the community. We need to give them, if we can give voice to it, we need to allow them to know we'll back them up, instead of going around saying, well, we'll remove you from office and put you in jail if you don't do what we want. Yeah, let's go smack them with a club. Funny that they don't agree with us after you do that. Coming up on 8:29, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage, who really is the man behind the Brexit in England, was speaking to CNN yesterday and gave somewhat of an endorsement to Donald Trump. I want to talk about that perhaps in the 9 o'clock hour, but he was also asked about Hillary Clinton.
There's nothing on earth could persuade me ever to vote for Hillary Clinton.
You sure you don't want to think about that for a second?
No, absolutely not.
I
mean, she represents the political elite. It's almost as if she feels she has a sort of divine right to have that job.
And he's speaking of someone who is from a country anyway that used to have a divine right monarchy, and then they put some curbs on that. Every time I hear the man speak, though, I only regret that he's not one of ours. Bill Colley will. Of course, some people say neither is the current president. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine is on the way in just a few minutes. And we have a quick warm-up today. We're at 70 already, on our way into the 90s.